Have you ever tried a proven business strategy? I mean, followed it to the letter and it didn't work? What did you do next? They say that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result. And I think that this may be more true in the world of entrepreneurship than anywhere else. I cannot even count the number of times that I created a program, planned out a detailed challenge and launch strategy, only to hear crickets in my bank account come launch day. And every time that happened, do you want to know what my response was? Well, I guess I just must not be offering what they want. I never stopped to think that maybe what I was offering wasn't the problem, but how I was offering it. A lot of well meaning and well intentioned business coaches and mentors have tried to encourage and inspire me along the way by just reminding me that, the difference between those who succeed and those who fail is persistence and consistency. And I have a lot of mixed feelings about that. But I want to ask a really important question of you today. How do you know when your strategy is the problem or if you just need to be a little bit more patient? This is what I want to talk about today. And by the end of this, you will have a strategy to be able to tell the difference. But before we dive into this, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and ring that little notification bell so that you never miss a tutorial or upload. Okay, so let me just explain what I meant when I said I have mixed feelings about this, because it might confuse you a little bit to hear me say that I have mixed feelings about consistency and persistence when so much of my channel talks about how important it is to be consistent and building habits and routine and all of that. So let me clarify. The reason I have mixed feelings about this as business advice is because I think that when that advice is given, it's too common that we fail to explain what consistency and persistence actually looks like. Sometimes we get this impression, at least I certainly did, that all I needed to do was just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And that eventually, if I kept showing up and doing it, law of statistics or whatever, it would finally work. And I think there's a quote by Winston Churchill that I hear used a lot in the business world. And I don't know the exact verbiage, and I should because it's not even that long, but it's something like never, ever, ever, ever give up or something like that. And I feel like, again, it's the same kind of idea where it's used in this inspirational, like, just never give up, just keep showing up, all that stuff. And yes, yes, to a point. But we forget the fact that consistency and persistence doesn't mean stagnation. It doesn't mean keep doing the same exact thing over and over again. It simply means keep showing up. The how we show up and what we're doing is it needs to continue to adapt and change over time. So, if we've established that persistence alone won't fix things, how do you know when your strategy is the problem? Let's break this down. And I'm going to be calling on the wisdom of one of my favorites in this episode. So, keep an eye out for that. What does it look like when your strategy is the problem, when your strategy is not working? It can look like a lot of different things, but typically the most kind of obvious things that I notice are a lack of engagement from my audience, totally stagnant or non existent sales, and an audience disconnect. You can feel it in your bones when your audience is really connecting with what you're talking about. Not just because you'll get lots of comments and likes and engagement, which is obviously part of it, but it's what they're saying when they're connecting. It's clearly thoughtful and thought out responses as opposed to just love this or emojis or whatnot. Not that that kind of engagement is bad, it's not, but you're going to really feel it when you're speaking to the heart of your audience and what they're really struggling with. So it makes sense that the flip would also be true. When you are not feeling that connection from your audience and when there isn't a whole lot of engagement or you feel like you're constantly having to kind of spark the engagement, and I think you know what I mean when I say that, those are those initial signs that, maybe your strategy is the problem. Now, this doesn't mean that there couldn't be more going on here. You still might need to address what you're actually offering because strategy isn't always the entire solution. But it's a great place to start because you don't want to go back to the drawing board every time your sales aren't what you're expecting, right? Sometimes it's just in how you're presenting it. So, what do you do first when you start to recognize that, yeah, I think the strategy is at least part of the problem here? Well, you need to listen to your audience. Are you solving the right problem? I think something that I have dealt with a lot myself, and I'm sure I'm not alone here, is the fact that as the expert in a particular field, you know the true root of the problem that your audience is struggling with. But do they know it? Now, it may be that you know that, let's say, for example, confidence is the real reason why your audience is not succeeding in what they're trying to do or they're struggling with something. It's their confidence. But if you approach them with a tool that is pointed at someone who is looking to boost their confidence and they don't realize that confidence is their issue, they think, for example, that it's something a whole lot more practical, well, then you're not going to reach them in the way that you're looking for. Not because they don't want what you're ultimately offering, but because you're not speaking to the problem that they realize that they have. So take another look at the problem that you're trying to solve, and especially that you're communicating that you're trying to solve, and ask yourself, is this the deeper problem or is this the surface level problem? Because chances are your audience is not even aware of that deeper level problem yet. So you need to focus on that more surface level practical problem that they do know that they're having. So start focusing on how you can start to solve that problem first, and you're going to see a huge difference in the reaction of your audience. The second question to ask yourself here is, are you speaking the right language? Okay. So, as the SME or subject matter expert in your field, you know all the right terminology. This I deal with a lot because as a tech coach, I know all the proper terminology for the apps and tools and platforms, and whether it's an ERP or a CRM or you know what I'm saying? You're already dizzy if this is not your field because this is not the language that you speak. When I started out in this field, I really struggled with how to speak in a way that my audience was going to understand what I was talking about. And this is where really interacting with and getting feedback from my audience was key. Listening to the words that they were using to describe the same things that I was describing, and then shifting my messaging to match what they were saying. I think for me, especially in the tech world, there is this kind of tendency to want to sound like the expert. And so using correct terminology and all of that made me feel like I sounded like the expert. And okay, maybe it did, but was it going to get through to my audience? Probably not. In fact, it was probably more likely to make them say, okay, well, she obviously knows what she's talking about, but she's way too advanced for me. And that's not who I'm talking to. I'm talking to beginners, newbies. I'm talking to people who, okay, maybe they've been in business for a long time, but delving into this online tool world might be totally new to them. And so if I'm speaking kind of over their head in that way and using terminology that they just aren't going to know, especially acronyms, well, then yeah, I've lost them before we even start. So if you're struggling with this, if you're starting to think, okay, I don't know what words I'm using that are over my audience's head, above the knowledge that they have right now. Stop and think about something that you want to learn and that you're struggling with, and listen to how experts in that field, not people you're trying to learn from, but experts in that field are talking about that thing. And then think about the words that you use when you talk about it. See if you can translate that into your own area of expertise. That, in addition to listening to the actual words that your audience is using, is really going to help you more clearly explain the value of what it is that you're offering. And your audience is going to get it so much quicker. And when they do, you're going to see a huge shift in their desire for what you're offering, and your conversions, they're going to go up with it. Now, on the more technical side of this is a great opportunity for you to use what's called split or A/B testing. Now, if that's something that you've never heard of before or something that you've never done, or maybe you've seen the words before in your email marketing platform, or even if you're on YouTube, you can do this kind of split testing in thumbnail design now too. What this means essentially is creating two different, or sometimes you can do more than two, options of something. So whether it's using a different graphic or different wording, different messaging, You can do multiple variations. And when you use the tools that allow for this kind of split testing, you can send out different things to different people and see what resonates most with your target audience. This is a great way to get feedback from your audience without them even realizing that they're giving it. And then the third question you should ask yourself is, are you showing up in the right places? We've talked about this before. We've talked about how when you spread yourself too thin in content marketing in particular, when you're trying to be on all the platforms, for you, that's a nightmare. It's a recipe for burnout. But it's also potentially a part of the reason why your strategy doesn't seem to be working. You might be saying exactly the right words, you might be solving exactly the right problem, but you're telling the wrong people. And that can be so frustrating because you may spend all this time continually tweaking things and all of that. This has actually happened to me before where I tweaked my messaging and I changed what I was offering. And then I found where my audience was. And I realized, wait a minute, what I was offering way back then, this audience wanted. I just was offering it to the wrong people. So this is another one of those times where that market research comes in so handy, making sure that you know where your audience is going online and not just where they spend their time. I'm not talking about where they like to doom scroll social media. I'm talking about where they like to go to look for the type of solution that you're offering. So they may spend a lot of time on Instagram scrolling through. And in my case, I think that my audience does spend a lot of time on Instagram scrolling and getting inspired and things like that. And so that is why it is my secondary channel to have a presence and be on Instagram. But Instagram's not really where people go to learn how to do something, especially when it comes to tech stuff. They go to YouTube. So that's why that is my primary channel, right? So hopefully that helps you kind of translate a little bit better into your own business and help you figure out, okay, yes, it makes sense for me to have some presence here, but where should I be focusing my offers? Where should I be focusing my messaging? And make sure that you're talking to the right people. And after you've done all of these things, don't plan in a vacuum. When you have a new idea for a new product in your business or, maybe a whole different type of marketing channel, don't just start planning it on your own. Get feedback. If you already have a customer base, talk to them, even if it's only a few people. Talk to them about the product or the service that you're planning on creating and see how they respond to it. See if it sounds like something that they would like. And you might even tap into what Pat Flynn talks about in Will It Fly, where he actually not only gets the response of whether or not somebody would be interested in buying something, but actually have them pre-order that thing. Even if it's a service, you can still do that. That way you know for sure that they're not just saying, oh yeah, that sounds great, but they're actually serious. This is something they really want. You can save so much time not creating things, not building things that ultimately nobody wants when you do that. But let's say you don't have any clients yet, but you do have a small audience. Well, then do a survey, do a poll, ask your audience, is this something that you would want to buy? You can still offer that pre-order kind of concept there, or you can just use this as a way to gauge their interest based on how they respond. Same thing could apply if you're talking about a different marketing channel or something like that. Ask them, hey, where do you go when you want to learn XYZ? Or where do you go when you're trying to buy whatever it might be that you're going to sell? Ask them, they'll tell you, because 9 times out of 10, they might not even realize this is you doing market research. They might think you're looking for advice and they can point you in the right direction. People love doing that. And then let's just say you are just starting out here. You don't have a client base and you don't yet have an audience that you can poll in that way. That's okay. You still don't want to plan completely in a vacuum. So at this point, I would say find a couple of trusted people, not too many. You don't want too many opinions coming in at you when you're making a decision like this, but find people that are in a similar arena, tell them your idea, and listen to what they have to say about it. Especially if you're already at the messaging stage, tell them what you're planning to say and see if they can repeat back to you what they understood from what you said. And maybe you can find a disconnect there before you even try putting it out to your mainstream target audience. Once you've listened to your audience, the next step is just to review the results. Take a look at everything that you learned, and chances are you're going to see pretty clearly whether or not there's a major pivot needed or if a few tweaks might make the difference. Start by implementing a few tweaks here and there and see if anything changes. Are you getting more engagement on any particular platform? Are you seeing more conversions when you've simplified your language and you're speaking a little bit more clearly? If so, then there's probably no need to go all the way back to the drawing board here. Just keep working through those tweaks and paying attention to what your audience is telling you, both in their words and their actions. However, if none of your changes seem to be having any effect, if they're not moving the needle at all, then this is probably your indicator that you need to reassess some aspect of your offer or your messaging, or maybe even your audience. Now, it's not all doom and gloom here, okay? So let's just remember having failure is not the end of anything. In fact, it's kind of more of a beginning. So here's where that nugget from one of my favorites comes along, Pat Flynn. We haven't talked about him in a little bit, so I was excited to come back to him. Years ago, he was a guest on The Chalene Show. That is Chalene Johnson's really popular podcast. When he was asked about his guiding principles, he had this to say, and I really liked it. He said, "The greatest thrill in business is to experience success that you manufactured yourself. The joy comes from knowing that I did that, me. Taking pride in one's craft and working hard for one's own rewards is the opportunity of a lifetime. Failures and missteps will happen along the way. That's natural. When they occur, get up, learn from them, and move forward." I think this is such a beautiful way of looking at the entrepreneur journey. I can definitely attest, as someone who works a real job in addition to building my business, there is a completely different feeling, a different satisfaction that comes from experiencing success in my own business versus at work. Obviously, experiencing success anywhere is fantastic, but it's just so much more rewarding when I find success in something that I've done on my own versus something that I do at my job. So, final thoughts here. It's not a question of if, it's a matter of when. Okay. So, when your business strategy isn't working, start by going back to the basics. And just remember, success is not about blindly sticking with a failing plan. It's about staying committed and staying adaptable. So, the question I want to ask you this week is, have you ever had to pivot your strategy? What was the biggest lesson that you learned? Let me know in the comments. I hope you liked that video, and more importantly, that you found it helpful. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing it with a fellow solopreneur. And make sure you check out the description for links to how we can connect and maybe even work together.